In this video, we're going to learn about electronic components. This is part of Electronics Level 1 and is activity number 3. For more information and to get the activity, go to jb.works and at the search prompt, enter the TMT code shown on the screen. Electronics is something that it's really good to learn because if you learn it and then do coding, you can do so much more with your code. So what we're going to do at Level 1 Electronics is start to introduce electronics, and there's no real better place to start doing that than the electronic components. So these are examples of different types of circuit boards. The two on the left-hand side are very old, and you can see the components are very visible. And then this Raspberry Pi 3 on the right is a very new circuit, and you can tell that there are very few components. So what we're going to do in this video is quickly look at the different types of electronic part. Here's the table of parts. So on the left hand side we've got the part itself, so you know what it looks like. And on the right hand side we've got the symbol that's used to represent it on a thing called a circuit diagram. And then lastly is a description of what the part does. So starting off with the resistor, all the resistor does is resist the flow of current in a circuit. It's equivalent to someone squeezing a hose, and if the water going through the hose is the current, you all know that when you squeeze the hose, less water goes through it. And that's basically the job of a resistor. This next one is called a light-dependent resistor. And all this is a type of resistor whose resistance changes with the amount of light that falls on it. Next we have a capacitor. And capacitors are really cool because they let you store energy for short periods of time. And they can charge very, very quickly and discharge or release their energy very, very quickly. So if you had an iPhone and you had an ideal capacitor type battery, you could literally charge it from flat to 100% in a matter of seconds. And finally on this page we have a switch. So all a switch does is interrupt the flow of current in a wire. So it's equivalent to a valve on a hose. So if you close the valve, the water can't flow. If you open a switch, the current can't flow. Now we come to parts called semiconductors. We won't worry about why that is now, but we'll just have a quick look at what they do. Now the first one is the diode. And all that does is literally make it so that current can only flow from left to right. So it can only flow in this direction, from there to there. It cannot flow from right to left. Essentially, it's like a one-way valve in a water pipe. So the water will only be able to flow one way and not the other way. The next part is a thing called a light emitting diode. And all this is a diode that emits light. And these are used everywhere, in watches, television sets, you name it, they usually have a light emitting diode in them. And then lastly we have a transistor. And all this is a really fast electronic switch. And it lets you turn current on and off in a circuit very, very quickly. And things like the iPhone 12 have billions of these inside them because they're very, very quick and they're absolutely perfect for making computers. But you can also use them to turn things on and off like lights, motors, etc. Next we have wire. All wire does is conduct electricity. And electricity is basically the movement of electrons. So you can think of a piece of wire in a circuit almost being equivalent to a hose with water. The hose is the wire and the water is a current flowing through. And the symbol on the right hand side is what we use in circuits. And then finally we have jumper wires. Now all these are special wires that have plugs or sockets on either end, and you can use those then to make circuits on things like the top. Now let's have a look at some of these parts in more detail and also look at where they are on the JackBord top. So for a start we have the resistor, and once again all the resistor does is resist the flow of current going through a circuit. And on the top These are the resistors here. Okay. Then next we have a light dependent resistor. And this is basically just a type of resistor whose value is determined by the amount of light that's falling on it. And on the top, it's right there. Okay. After that, we have the capacitor, and this guy basically stores charge. Very, very quickly, you can charge it, you can discharge it very quickly, but the problem is they leak. Basically, they're not like a battery where you can charge it and then it will hold the charge for ages. When you charge one of these, they'll start leaking pretty much straight away. So it would be great if they didn't leak, because then if you had something like an iPhone 12 with a capacitor battery, you'd literally be able to charge it from 0 to 100% in a matter of seconds. But we can't do that because they actually do leak. Next, we have a switch or a button. And the whole purpose of a switch or a button is to literally bring two wires together. That's all they do. So if it's open, the wires are separate, no current can flow, and if they're closed, then the wires are connected and current can flow through the circuit. And on the top, I've got them, two of those guys here. Oh, and the capacitors on the top are these three in the middle. And they're actually underneath. You can see them, they're surface mount parts. Next we have the diode. And what the diode does is it will only allow current to flow in one direction. So for this diode, it will only be able to flow from here to here. You cannot have current going from here to here because the diode will block it. And on the top, that's the diode right there. Next we have the LED, so a light emitting diode. So it's basically a diode, but it emits light. And on the top, we have quite a few of these. We've got these 5 here. There's an RGB one here, and there's a special RGB one right here. So light emitting diodes emit light. This is a transistor, which is basically an electronic version of this, and you can see the size difference. This lets you control a switching action extremely quickly, and things like computers have millions or billions of them inside. And on the top there are 3. There's one here, and then these 2. And these 2 are actually on the other side, because they're surface mount transistors. But there's the transistor there. And this is also a transistor, but this is what's called a power transistor. And it's much, much bigger than a normal transistor, and that's because it needs to carry a lot more power. And then we come to wire. So literally, this is a piece of wire, and all it is a piece of copper with a nickel or chrome coating and a cover of plastic. And electrons in the form of current flow through this wire. So on the top, all of the circuit lines going around are equivalent to wires. And then lastly, we've got jumper wires. And these are exactly the same as normal wires, except that if you look on each end, they have a female connector. And what these let you do is you can plug them into pins on the top and use them to make circuits. But basically they do the same thing as a wire. They conduct electricity. So this was an introduction to electronic components as part of Activity 3 for Level 1 Electronics. And now lastly, we're going to have a look at some of these circuits in front of us, these PCB boards, and see if we can find some of the parts. So looking at this old telephone, these are the capacitors, so the green ones, the blue ones. The resistors are things like this one here, and these ones in here. And then you've got the diodes, lots of diodes, that's these guys over here. And we have a button switch here, another switch here, that's a capacitor. And this is called an integrated circuit, and that has a lot of transistors inside. And that's pretty much it. I can't see many other parts in there. transistors there, here and here. And this is a relatively simple circuit. It's probably got a couple of hundred components in it. This is a child's walkie-talkie, so that's a switch there. These are transistors here. These kind of browny ones are capacitors. So are these blue ones. That's a little speaker. That's a transformer, and that's another transformer, because this was a radio transmitter, so you can see it's got lots of little transformers in it and inductors. And then finally, this is a Raspberry Pi 3. Now, there are not that many components from the looks of it compared to, say, these, and yet this literally has hundreds of millions, if not billions, of parts inside it. And that's because of these chips here. And they contain billions of transistors. This little smattering of what looks like dust, these are resistors. And then over this side, you've got things like conductors, diode there, and a couple of LEDs here. For more information, visit jb.works.